Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, and as I like to remind you each and every day, it helps to expand our base. This morning is a difficult morning. Where to begin? That's the question. And I've chosen to begin with foreign policy. What is happening in Ukraine at this moment is disastrous. And everyone needs to understand that what is happening in Ukraine is happening despite the United States' efforts, one way or the other. And by the way, we are sending confusing signals. This morning, for the first time, Donald Trump offered mild criticism of Vladimir Putin. But at the same time, he's sending a message to the Ukrainians, maybe you ought to surrender Crimea. And of course, we have the situation where the Secretary of State of the United States, Marco Rubio, didn't show up for a critical meeting. And in the meantime, in Kyiv, the tragedy is unfolding on a daily basis with drone attacks, with missiles hitting the city, with disaster at every single level. And so the question becomes, what happened to Donald Trump's pledge that he would solve the problem of Ukraine within hours of his becoming president, even before he became president? And of course, the answer is, like so many of Donald Trump's suppositions and guarantees, they didn't come to fruition. We're going to be watching what happens in Ukraine because in this Easter season, particularly for the Russian Orthodox, this makes a real moment in time. But the tragedy of Ukraine continues to unfold, and Donald Trump's bold promises seemingly going nowhere. And I want to say a word about Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, and yes, the chairman of the PLO. At the PLO Central Council meeting just the other day, Mahmoud Abbas called Hamas sons of dogs. He called for freedom of the hostages. His reason? Because the hostages give Israel an excuse to continue its war. There is no question but that the division in the Palestinian community between Hamas and the PLO, or Palestinian Authority, is real and genuine. In the meantime, the chance for peace or any kind of ceasefire, or any kind of reconciliation seems to be slipping away. And so, when it comes to foreign policy, again, remember it was Donald Trump who proposed, let's clean out Gaza. Let's turn it into the vacation capital of the world. Remember that? Well, we have real facts on the ground, and it would seem the Trump administration is unable to cope with them in a real way. And then we have the death of the Pope. And I want to point out that the president and his wife, Melania, are going to the funeral. Yet we know that the tensions between Donald Trump and the late pontiff were real and genuine. There is now a need for the world to stop and reflect. Not everything that Pope Francis said was correct. There were many points of disagreement. All you have to do is talk to Catholics about it. But the simple truth is he was a good man. And we will see now what the reaction is at his funeral, which will bring together, by the way, all world leaders, except Vladimir Putin is not coming. Putin has said no, but Zelensky will be there. Macron will be there. Trump will be there. Well, let's see what happens on the sidelines of the Pope's funeral. And now, if I may, I want to turn to another question. The question of the Defense Department and what is happening now under Pete Hegseth. You all know that his wife is now applying for a security clearance and that she has been included in a lot of, meetings. And there is now a question, a real question, about whether or not Hegseth is a successful director of his agency. That's right. The Secretary of Defense is the director of the Department of Defense. And here's the kicker. The people who have left, the people who Hegseth is now attacking, are not people from the previous administration. They were among his closest confidants, his closest companions, his closest supporters. So there is something dysfunctional in the Department of Defense, and we have a Secretary of Defense who clearly has serious problems. And we have a president who, at least as of this moment, continues to stand by Pete Hegseth. One can only speculate, if this were Joe Biden, what Donald Trump would be saying about this kind of catastrophe in the Department of Defense. And now, if we may turn for a moment to domestic issues, because they are important. At this moment, the Secretary of State is beginning the process of dismantling much of the State Department. Let me tell you, as someone who has worked in foreign policy for many years, it is a tremendous mistake. The expertise in the State Department, not necessarily the fact that they're always right, but the expertise in the State Department being eliminated, is ludicrous, disgusting, and will create more problems for us in terms of foreign policy. Marco Rubio, as a former United States Senator and someone who has been involved in all of this, should certainly know better. But now, perhaps one of the most difficult issues that I will deal with today, and that is the decision by Trump to create a task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias in his government. By the way, that order, an executive order, was issued on February 6th. I didn't notice it. There's so many executive orders, it's hard to keep track. But what we know is that now Pam Bondi and J.D. Vance and others in the administration are supporting actively this idea of a task force to root out anti-Christian sentiment in our government. Oh, and by the way, the first meeting of the task force was closed. It wasn't open to the public. So we have no idea, at least I have no idea as of this morning, what in fact happened. But can you imagine, for those who love what we try to do in government, the idea that now there is a purge taking place, and that purge has to do with the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. It has to do with an anti-Christian bias task force. It has to do with what I can only recall and remember as the most perilous moment that I have witnessed in terms of the functioning of the Justice Department. There is something seriously rotten, and it's rotten to the core, and it's time for Republicans to stand up and say so. By the way, I have no kind words for Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. She is not someone who I would have wanted to be Attorney General. She is still an election denier from 2020. She is now someone who is waging a war against anti-Christian sentiment in the Justice Department and in our government. My friends, I want you to stop and think about what we've covered this morning, and it's only a fraction of what we could have covered. I say this because I limit myself to these roughly 10 minutes with you every day. But make no mistake, these problems are growing internationally, nationally, in terms of the Trump administration, and we will have a lot more to say about all of this in the days ahead. In the meantime, we will watch carefully what happens in the next few hours in Ukraine, what will happen in the Middle East, what the implications are for what is happening now in the United States of America. These are real questions. And by the way, somebody asked me once, "Hey, John, what are you going to talk about today?" Let me tell you, every day there is too much to discuss. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. You can interact with me, as many of you do, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or by emailing me directly, and I'm happy to receive your comments. I may not always agree with what's said, but heck, that's what makes this interesting, right? And finally, to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this podcast. Thanks, Gogo, for doing such a great job. And, well, Gogo's taken the weekend to consider all of this, I'm sure. But don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow. Thank heaven it's Friday, and we'll be able to continue our discussion. I am John Rothman. You are listening to Around the Political World, and we will be back tomorrow. See you then.